The views and opinions presented in this video do not necessarily represent my own. The content presented in this video is intended solely for educational and informational purposes. It does not constitute professional advice. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own research to formulate their own opinions. Mic check. So I'm going to be going over the Superstition Mountains. The mysteries and superstition surrounding this mountain range are captivating. The tales associated with these mountains have attracted treasure hunters, ghost hunters, daring hikers, conspiracy theorists, and the like, with the most popular tale being that of the lost Dutchman's mine. Details about this story will be revealed as we progress. Forewarning, this story should not be confused with the Flying Dutchman and his ship. Although interesting, it's a completely different tale. Other equally important aspects include the wealthy Mexican-American family known as the Peraltas, their gold/their mine, the Apache Indians, the Pima Indians, the Aztecs, missing hikers, government experiments, aliens, cryptids, Nephilim, reptilians, and basically the whole shebang falling under the conspiracy paradigm. Get ready, because this story is chock full of betrayal, murder, magic, fantasy, confusion, mirage, and more. Climate/weather. It experiences 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. The summer is the most extreme of the seasons, with the average temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The Phoenix area someday reaches over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The summer season also comes with thunderstorms and rain, which is followed by monsoons. These monsoons typically begin in June and last until September. In the spring, which is said to be the best time to visit, flowers are in bloom and the temperature is not too cool, ranging roughly between 65 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. During this season, there is a vibrant display of colors such as orange, purples, whites, and gold. Unfortunately, this season only lasts around a month, so it's from late March to early April. Fall starts around September 22nd and possibly ends somewhere around late December 21st, with high temperatures starting in the 90s but significantly decreasing to 80s, 70s, 60s over the months. Lows are from 60s to 50s, and with 40s being the lowest the area gets. Rarely do temperatures drop below freezing though. So winter is predominantly sunny with mild temperatures and some rain. Rarely does it snow despite elevation. The highs are in the 60s and the lows are in the 40s, and that's all in Fahrenheit. Biodiversity. The southwestern fauna of this desert mountain range includes rabbits, coyotes, desert mules, greater roadrunners, Gila monsters, rattlesnakes, hummingbirds, red-tailed hawks, and more. The flora includes saguaro cacti, it's basically cactus, cholas, prickly pears, barrel cacti, ocotillo, agaves, and yuccas. Furthermore, it's stated on AZ State Park's website that the diverse variety of desert plants found within the Superstition Mountains is absolutely mind-blowing. I'll just mention a few more. There's chia, coyote melon, desert tobacco, fairy duster, jojoba, minor lettuce, milkweed, Mormon tea, skeleton weed, buckhorn, cholla, and hedgehog. Most of the flora comes into bloom in the spring and early summer. And so all this matters because people in the times past had to contend with these elements. There's a spiritual component to nature. It's this climate that contributes to the stories, or rather the lore of the superstitions. Location. They're located some 44 miles east of Phoenix in Pinal County, Arizona. The topography is made up of jagged canyons and volcanic peaks. It has an average elevation of 3,691 feet, with an approximate elevation being 4.5 thousand feet above sea level. Its coordinates are 33.4286606, and I find it suspicious that the precise location just so happens to contain 3 sixes. I'm going to expand on the artificial and natural topography this area exhibits, which include walking paths / nature trails. They have camping site areas like for RVs, tents, cabins, shelters. There's horse trails, picnic areas, cycling trails, playgrounds, pavilions, golf courses, caves, basketball courts, volleyball courts, tennis courts, and more. Also, the area has many rivers and creeks, some being Revis Creek and Walnut Cottonwood Springs. Lakes too are nearby. In general, the entire area contains 160,000 acres of rugged desert. History. There are plenty legends associated with these mountains. These various stories mostly have a commonality, but it all boils down to who is willing to believe what version of the so-called legends. Let's start with the Dutchman himself. Jacob Waltz. Well, he wasn't actually a Dutchman. Instead, he was born in Germany and immigrated to the US around 1839, at least based on documentation of it. He was born in the Kingdom of Württemberg in Germany in 1810, but engraved on his tombstone it says 1808. So facts around these stories are muddled. Remember, there's at least 62 variants of this story, and that's according to Wikipedia. Anyhow, by the 1860s, Waltz wound up in Arizona and settled outside of Phoenix. It's believed he relocated from California. Allegedly, Jacob Waltz on his deathbed gave a confession to Dick Holmes. The Dutchman was gravely ill. Meanwhile, Dick took advantage by using this to get his foot in the door and sit face to face with the Dutchman. Finally, the Dutchman begins to relay his account to the enticed and ambitious young Dick Holmes. The Dutchman, year 1877. So this is the story he supposedly told Dick. The year was 1877. Waltz was prospecting in the Superstition Mountains, but was ambushed by some Apaches. However, he was barely able to evade the Indians' attack. Through the chaos, this caused Waltz to wound up lost. Unfamiliar with his surroundings, he began to wander the unforgiving Arizona landscape. Luckily, he stumbles upon a dry wash. A wash is just a dry watercourse that temporarily or seasonally fills and flows after sufficient rain. In other words, it's a dry creek bed or a water channel. Waltz begins looking for essentials, water or food. Being an experienced prospector slash outdoorsman himself, he noticed footprints in the wash, but not moccasin Apache prints, rather boot prints. He follows the trail of likely out of desperation for provisions. Eventually, he tracks his way into a camp, helps himself to some food. The same evening, 3 Mexicans show up. These Mexicans were mineros and started talking shock talk with Waltz. They showed Waltz some of the ore, and that is what hit the nail in the coffin for the Dutchman. Supposedly, in this version of accounts, these unwary Mexicans stupidly show Waltz their mining operation. Upon witnessing this gold, the Dutchman's eyes are said to have grown big and wide. Certainly, he was struck with gold fever. Allegedly, this deposit of gold is so rich that it's estimated to be worth over $200 million in today's value. So his fantasy as a prospector became a reality. Greed soon consumed the Dutchman. He murders the miners in cold blood, though it's uncertain how. Perhaps the betrayal happened by gunshots, or perhaps the Dutchman plotted against the men by gaining their trust and then pouncing. Regardless, he begins mining and works all winter long. He ends up having to go back to town for supplies. But while in town, and to his dismay, 2 soldiers show up in town using gold to pay for things, declaring to all of Phoenix that they struck riches up in the mountains. Immediately, Waltz scurries back to his previous mine. Lo and behold, he finds a soldier heading towards the Dutchman's mine. He was unforgiving and once again was faced with an ultimatum: to lose complete ownership or kill. He chose the latter and made light work of killing and disposing of the remains of the soldiers. This would not be the last time. The Dutchman would be confronted by other prospectors. A 6th victim innocently wandered too close in the general location of the mine and was killed. The body was buried and the victim's possessions were burned. Some way, the tale of the alleged mine became a legend, a local legend, in the Phoenix area and garnered so much attention that Waltz possibly spent more time defending the mine than actually mining it. So in haste comes a revelation forged out of the darkest corner of Waltz's closet. He needed a trustworthy partner, so he wired money to his sister in Germany as an inducement to ask if she would send her son to help. The nephew ends up making the journey to Arizona. Unfortunately, blood did not prove thicker than water. The relationship between the uncle and nephew deteriorated. Likely in paranoia, Waltz suspected his only partner was out to kill him. Waltz drew first blood and kills his nephew. He swung a chain around his lifeless nephew's neck and dragged the body to a sandy spot in Agua Escondidas and buried the corpse. Now it's time to bring the protagonist into the equation by briefly introducing his story. Dick Holmes, at the age of 19 in 1884, was accompanied around a campfire by a passing John Phipps. This passerby asked for shelter. Dick Holmes shows the man Western hospitality. Phipps tells his version of this infamous story. To spare the details, basically Pip claims he was actually able to get inside the Dutchman's mine and actually started mining it, but he also got caught. It seems Phipps was so terrified he never went back, which may lead some to believe that the Dutchman was more than just an old man. Was there some spiritual implications, some evil entity that allowed the Dutchman to mine this gold? No one knows. So in 1875, a 10-year-old Dick Holmes signed up to fight the Apache. He became a supply runner for military outpost. From there, he went on to becoming a cavalry scout as he got older. It is said he fought with distinction. After his service, he may have turned to prospecting full-time. Around a campfire, Dick hears of an old man who covets a gold mine with the highest grade of ore, John Phipps. Ironically, as fate would have it, Dick manages to track down such a man he suspects of being the gatekeeper to this mine, the one and only Jacob Waltz. He, being ambitious and nosy, follows the old man around from afar into the desert wilderness. The problem is that this was not Waltz's first radio. Waltz, being experienced and prepared, was shooting the back trail. This treasure-preserving tactic is simply waiting, stopping, and turning around to check if anyone is trailing behind. Dick, being young, dumb, and full of cum, unwittingly walks into the trap. Waltz raises his shotgun and aims it directly at Dick. Dick braced himself. Though what happens next is bewildering. Jacob Waltz, a cold-blooded killer whose own greed and paranoia caused him to kill his own flesh and blood, his sister's son, tells Dick, "Don't do that again," and casually walks off. Now it's time to factor in this story's antagonist, Julia Thomas. Dick's main competitor / enemy was a savvy businesswoman, a black lady named Julia Thomas. Her connection with Jacob Waltz was that of a friend whom ended up becoming caretaker on Waltz's deathbed. She ran her own business, selling ice cream and oysters at a parlor in hot and arid Phoenix on Washington Street. It was an obvious success. She was married to a German named Emil, which, by the way of this union, she learned to speak German. Sadly, her husband walked out on her and took everything except the debts. Miraculously, though, she makes it out of debt. Records were kept about this woman's financials, and they say there is no indication of where she got the money to pay off her dues. Rumor has it, Waltz helped her out. Phoenix at the time was a small town. One couldn't sneeze without everyone knowing about it. Dick Holmes, at some point, through the grapevine, heard Julia got help from Waltz and must have been convinced the legends of the mines were real. 1891 comes around and a cataclysmic event took place in Phoenix. A flash flood, rendering the Dutchman homeless and sick. Julia Thomas, being a genuine friend, took the old man in and caretook the gravely ill man at the back of her establishment. One morning, Waltz's health took a turn for the worst. Seeing the opportunity, Dick rushed over. Julia, staggering to fetch a doctor, recognized and asked Meddlesome Dick to keep watch of the old man. So, Meddlesome Dick desired to know the location of the mine. With his newly acquired luck, he enters Julia's establishment and finds Waltz eagerly sits down on his bedside. Waltz proceeds to talk, though not about the location of the mine. This frustrates Dick. Here he is, so close to satisfying his feverish lust for gold, and recounts the story mentioned earlier. Though impatient Dick's primary goal was the location of the mine, the Dutchman had some things to get off his chest, along with some advice. The Dutchman laid out a deal to the frustrated young prospector. He pointed at a chest underneath his bed and gives Dick an ultimatum. If Dick would send money to his sister, to Walt's sister in Germany, he would give the directions to the mine. Dick agrees. Tragically, the directions that were given weren't clear. As fate would have it, before Holmes could ask clarifying questions, Jacob Waltz passed away. Jacob supposedly said the mine is in the north-south canyon. He also said to follow the old government trail. Look for a boulder that resembled a man's face, or close by will be a house built of rock. Near the house will be the entrance to the mine. Well, Dick Holmes, on the other hand, didn't have the chance to ask a simple question. Do the waters flow north or do the waters flow south? Or any crucial inquiries. There are holes in the story too. One being that, as mentioned earlier, who in their right mind in the midst of a gold rush Wild West days would be so naive as to give a stranger access to a gold mine? In this case, the Mexican miners, aka the Peraltas. But again, this was one of the plenty of variations of this story. Nobody knows for sure. In the aftermath, Dick got married. There was also accounts of the newlyweds birthing a child and splurging. Also, there's tax records of Dick Holmes that indicate his lifestyle increased exponentially. He bought property too, so apparently there was a chest of gold containing a small fortune. Circling back, Julia was hell-bent on revenge. What she ended up doing was drafting up bogus maps and selling them for $10 a pop. And mind you, this is back in the 1800s, so $10 was a substantial amount. This had thwarted Dick's attempt to find the lost Dutchman's mine. She also told as many people as she could that Waltz told Dick where the mine was, rendering Dick unable to explore with the advantage of being low-key. In the end, neither party found the Dutchman's treasure. Dick Holmes went on to becoming a family man. His son carried on his father's treasure hunting legacy. So there's a fair amount of documentation of both Dick and his son. The Peraltas. The miners that preceded Waltz weren't just random Mexicans. Allegedly, they were a part of a well-off family known as the Peraltas. However, the story is confusing because there may have been two Peralta families simultaneously existing. Another layer of this mystery is if the Spanish were even mining in Arizona around 1876. Though there is evidence to support claims the Spanish were mining the land. Now whether or not it was the Peraltas again depends on the variation of accounts one chooses to believe. There was also a huge fraud scandal perpetrated by James Addison Reeves, who claimed a land grant was made out to the Peraltas and that this land grant was in his possession. The phony land grant was said to encompass much of the Salt River Valley. So there is documentation of a Peralta family or Spanish settlers who arrived in Alta California in 1776. The official records state that there was such a family that settled California by way of land grant at the behest of the Spanish governor, Don Pablo Vicente del Sol, in 1820, whom made out to his sergeant, Luis Maria Peralta, a massive 44,800-acre land grant. This was done in lieu of Luis Peralta's 40 years of military service to the King of Spain. It is said that Luis never actually lived there. His four sons ended up developing the land first by building adobe homes. Next came things like cattle, horses, and they also built a hacienda. All this was located on the vast Rancho San Antonio. Rancho San Antonio was a commercial and social hub. Horse racing took place, cattle roundups, rodeos, games, and more. They even built a wharf on the bay near the hacienda to conduct trade of tallow and rawhide, harvested by the family's endeavors. They were also the first to build Spanish-speaking communities in the East Bay. Notice the problem. A wharf, right? The superstitions are in the desert. This land grant sounds like it was in modern-day Bay Area, California, not Arizona. There was said to be another Peralta family, originally from northern Mexico, Sonora to be exact. Supposedly, they developed mines in the superstitions perhaps during the 1840s via land grant. By 1848, a Peralta family or party embarked on a routine mission to bring back gold to Mexico, but they were ambushed by Apaches. Most were slaughtered and only a few escaped. This version of events is known as the massacre grounds. However, another version goes that Pima Indians met their demise at the hands of the Apache, and instead, this was the true massacre grounds tale. In another story mentioned earlier, Jacob Waltz was the one who got ambushed and barely escaped. Are these all different accounts? Was this the reputation of the Apache? Or has this story been retold so many times that its details are apocryphal? Nonetheless, the sullied versions have added obfuscation. Up until today, many men have searched for the treasure only to be left in complete befuddlement. Or even worse, many men have disappeared in these mountains. Side note, today the Supes have a protected status and the federal government enforces this status. Even if one were to find the Dutchman's mine, this status would render excavations illegal.
Sueño mexicano, mi mayor devoción. Sueño mexicano, mi raíz y pasión. Tu amor es el canto de mi corazón. El mariachi resuena con nuestro latir. Sueño mexicano, contigo quiero vivir.
Can the existence of Jacob Waltz be substantiated? Now, to answer another question, was Jacob Waltz real? Well, there actually is a real gravestone that one can visit with the name Jacob Waltz engraved into its tombstone. It's located in Tortilla Flats in Maricopa County, Arizona. There actually was a Jacob Waltz in the area, and to prove it, there's documentation via public records. He even shows up in citizenry and voting records in Los Angeles County, including photo of a tombstone. There are also records of the man in Maricopa County. Native American legends, Apaches, Pimas, etc. According to the Apache, the Thunder God resides at these mountains. But the Superstition Mountains name was dubbed by the Pima Indians, likely as a way to explain the supernatural accounts of the area. No one knows exactly what was going on around this area during its archaic period. They say the Indians populated the Supes over 1,000 years ago. The Pimas, otherwise known as Akimel Od Aham, were among one of the earliest known groups of peoples to have settled the area. Other inhabitants that possibly came before or existed during the time of the Pimas included the Solado and the Sinagua. Sinagua is basically Spanish for without water. Both are said to have built cliff dwellings. The Sinagua people are believed to consist of two different groups, a northern and southern. For the northern, they were around the Flagstaff, Arizona area, or for the southern, they were around the Verde Valley, Arizona area. It's posited they lived in ancient Arizona as far back as 650 CE, but they began constructing the cliff dwellings we see today roughly around 1050 CE. Again, according to official sources. The Solado are dated at around 1150 CE, up into the 15th century, and were known for their pottery. Before them may have come the Hohokam, whom are said to have left petroglyphs. I'd like to elaborate on the Pima briefly. They have an origin account that in several ways parallels biblical accounts of creation found in Genesis. The Ark on the Superstition Mountain is a fascinating folktale that has endured for possibly hundreds up to thousands of years. Who knows, perhaps this so-called recounting of events is steeped in truth. The legendary tale is but a portion of a compendium of other native oral traditional stories written down by an author, Charles M. Skinner, in 1896. Title of this book is Myths and Legends of Our Lands. Now for a passage from the Ark on the Superstition Mountain. The wisdom that had allowed Suha to hear the whispers of the wind now guided him in his quest for retribution. He observed the comings and goings of the devil, noting the secret paths that led to the heart of the Superstition Mountains. With the stealth of a coyote, Suha followed Hawk, his every step a silent testament to his unwavering commitment. So Suha is to this story a prophet, a conduit for the cosmic council of the creator god Cherwit Make, whom the Pima believed was a butterfly, whereas the devil is a part of mankind's folly. Hawk is too the embodiment of evil. Suha is partially akin to the biblical prophet Moses, and that's according to me. To compare him and say that he is Moses, I'm not sure, but let's continue. Suha, through his faith, was able to form and maintain a connection to the wisdom given by the way of the winds from the creator. This message was a plea for mankind to change its ways. Lamentably, man did not heed this call. Man not only opted to ignore, but to dismiss Suha's words with ridicule. Regrettably, mankind's reform wasn't a choice. It was commanded by Cherwit Make. The options were to change or face complete and utter annihilation. So in these moments of vulnerability arose an evil to capitalize on this critical juncture of man. Daughters disappeared, including Suha's, and sons met early demises. This motivated Suha, and in so doing, Suha had had enough, which led him to act in an avenging fashion. He would bring an end to Hawk's terror-filled reign. With this commitment, Suha observed the to's and the fro's of the devil, keeping a record of the secret paths, undetected due to his coyote-like strength. Cunningly, Suha managed to drug the cactus wine Hawk would drink, which led Hawk into a stupor. Suha, emerging out of the shadows, was able to pounce, striking the fiend for evil by beating his brains out, thus ending the scourge of this devil. Even so, the malevolence of Hawk, his essence still lingered, and his dark intelligence merely became fragmented and scattered throughout the land. These fragments became lesser evils. So just a side note, in fact, there's plenty of Native American derived legends that have influenced pop culture stories and characters, seemingly all over the world. So let's continue with another interesting passage from this book. The prophecy of pride and downfall as Sua's days waned and the twilight of his life approached. He gathered his people to impart a final prophecy with the clarity of foresight that had marked his time as seer. He spoke of a distant tomorrow where his descendants would stray once more. They would grow intoxicated with wealth, their eyes covetous of lands that were not their own, and their hands would once again wield instruments of war for gain. So this verse is interesting because it describes a colonial-like problem. In fact, the origins of this story is actually from Native Americans in pre-colonial times. Well, at least according to the author, Charles M. Skinner, right? And if it is, then it's a spot-on prediction of what ended up transpiring later on. However, it seems as if this native story takes from the Bible or the era to craft a story that fits into the times of that day. Now, here are some Genesis correlating passages for comparison. The Ark on Superstition Mountain, a Pima legend. And then I'll go into the corroborating Genesis verse. So, chariot make, earth maker, who fluttered down from the clouds to the blue cliffs at the junction of Verde and Salt rivers, and from his own sweat made men. As the people multiplied, they grew selfish and quarrelsome, so that chariot make was disgusted with his handiwork, and resolved to drown them all. But first he told them in the voice of the north wind to be honest and to live in peace. The prophet Suha, who interpreted his voice, was called a fool for listening to the wind. But the next night came the east wind and repeated the command, with an added threat that the ruler of heaven would destroy them all if they did not reform such. Now, for Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So here's another passage from the Ark on the Superstitions. Again, they scoffed. And on the next night, the west wind cautioned them. But this third warning was equally futile. On the fourth night came the south wind. It breathed into Suha's ears that he alone had been good and should be saved, and bade him to make a hollow ball of spruce gum, in which he might float while the deluge lasted. Suha and his wife immediately set out to gather the gum that they melted and shaped until they had made a large rounded ark, which they ballasted with jars of nuts, acorn meal, and water, and meat of bear and venison. Now, for the most compelling parallels between the Bible's Genesis accounts and the Ark on Superstitions. Genesis chapter 6, verse 13. God tells Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Genesis chapter 6, verse 14 through 16. God instructs Noah to build an ark of gopher wood, with rooms inside and outside, and to take 2 of every living thing into the ark, along with his family. Genesis chapter 6, verse 17. God states, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all the flesh in which is the breath of life. Under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. Now, Genesis chapter 9, verses 11 through 16. After the flood, God reiterates his covenant with Noah and establishes the rainbow as a sign of promise to never again destroy all living things with the flood. Genesis 6:14. There's clearly different versions of the Bible written. There's ESV, NIV, NASB, CSP, NLT. It basically says, make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. And if you take into account a piece of the Ark of Superstition passage that I just read, it says, it breathed into Suha's ear that he alone had been good and should be saved, and bade him a hollow ball of spruce gum, in which he might float while the deluge lasted. Suha immediately set out to gather gum that melted and shaped until they had made a large rounded ark that they had ballasted. So it's like the gum is the pitch, is comparable to the pitch in the Bible. Though is any of this legend in some way a derivative of biblical stories, either brought in some way to the lands of the Pima, or was it a disingenuous obfuscation, influenced for whatever reason, though likely for the shock value in order to sell books, right? So was it influenced instead directly from the Bible and not by Native American orators? I'll leave that to speculation. Cryptids, reptilians, missing persons, unexplained anomalies, missing person reports, and more. YouTuber, explorer, adventurer Terry Carter interviewed another explorer/adventurer, Shane Gurrell, who, Shane Gurrell, visited the Superstitions, the Grand Canyon, and Utah many times. I would refer to him as an expert on this matter. Anyways, he explored the area by land and air, For air travel, he used a Monster 185. Hopefully, I'll include a pic of that, which is a paramotor. This mode of transportation allowed him to quietly explore an immense area from an all-encompassing vantage point. He claims sites in the Grand Canyon, like the Mount Isis, is a temple. Further, adding to the lore of the Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. He also claims on this same site that there's carvings of cats, pharaohs, and even bullet holes. Him describing his exploits can be found on Terry Carter's channel via interview. The name of it is "The Shocking Things Found in the Grand Canyon and the Superstitions." So I'll briefly go through some significant aspects of his claims. Again, I'll just state his claims, but I'll only elaborate some of them. Shane believes the Egyptians started in the Grand Canyon. He found a Spanish conquistador helmet and donated it to the Lost Dutchman Museum, though he wasn't credited for the artifact. He says he found two giant skulls. One had a helmet with an eagle design, located on a rock next to some doorway. Brief interjection. He has made a lot of discoveries because he has explored the area by air in 3 different ways. He used a drone, by skydiving, and as mentioned, a paramotor. Right, let's continue. He found a missing girl, still alive by the way, and by some miracle assisted the authorities in her rescue. He found giant doors with giant keyholes, which look like they've been used. He alleges, and I'm quoting him directly from the interview he had with Terry. Definitely, there were giants in the Superstition Mountains. Right? And he goes on to say, the helmet of a skull he found was as big as a Volkswagen Bug. That is a massive, if it was a being in the past, that being would have been massive. He compares an experience he had when parked off Peralta Road to the blockbuster hit Jurassic Park. Him and his buddy were both in camper vans. They formed a triangle and set fire in the middle. Late at night, they retired to their vans. All of a sudden, boom, and there are shakes. Boom, another quake. And so whatever it was, he alleges that it was loud. So simply Shane states in his interview with Terry, and I quote, "I think that you have to know what you're looking for in order to find it. There's lots of things hidden in plain sight, you know? That would be a great show even. Hidden in plain sight. But if people don't know what they're looking for, they wouldn't see it." So let's continue. Furthermore, Shane wrote a book. It's called Peralta Stone's Treasure Map, My Decipher. He insists he deciphered the Peralta map, and he even claims to know where the map landmarks are. Like, there's one on this, it's a stone tablet. Supposedly, the Peraltas were the ones that had it, and there's a bunch of, I would call them forgeries today, but you could buy such a map today. So one of the landmarks on this map is a witch casting spells, right? And so he claims to know where that is located. According to him, it's actually a shadow, which at 5:30 p.m., probably depends on the season, but 5:30 p.m. casts an image of a warlock, complete with a pointy hat and beard, casting a spell. The Peralta map, he believes, is linked to the Knights Templar. These knights supposedly were teaching Christianity to the Aztecs, who lived up around the region. Shane says the Apache had a box that their thunder god was contained in. This box would be brought to war, right, to protect, which parallels the Ark of the Covenant. In this account, the Ark was left with the Aztecs. And if you don't know what the Ark of the Covenant was, it was definitely an ark, but it was like a box. And inside of the box supposedly contained some power of God. And it had the power to kill, change the trajectory of wars. I mean, this is according to the Bible. So another book he claims to have written is The Story of Truth, The Lost Dutchman's Treasure. Apparently, he's offering $1,000 for anyone who could find it. In his admission, the FBI confiscated the book, accusing the book of having borderline truths. He found a large gold nugget with a face engraved on it, which was also confiscated. No one is allowed to mine or take anything out of the soups. As I stated earlier, the FBI really does enforce that law. He claims he came across hooks on the side of a mountain where there's pillars at the face of the mountain. I believe this mountain is the Superstitions. Apparently, these hooks can be viewed with binoculars. These hooks, by the way, are humongous. So they open and close, but they open, right, and lock in place. And they probably lock back in place when they close. Let's continue. Giants, reptilians, little people, and a lot of weird stories are synonymous with the Supes. So one day he was flying his paramotor near Gold Canyon and he spotted a shape of a giant disc. In that same canyon, he looked down and saw a group of, he claims, right? And this is, and you could call it an outlandish claims, but this is the story he was recounting. That same day where he seen that giant disc, he looked down and saw a group of reptilians standing still. He describes them as having the face of dinosaurs with like a snout, and even claims that they were just as shocked as he was to see them. Off to the right of the flat iron area, there's carvings of an old man with a beard, with a lion's head, with a horn like a unicorn. There's an area walkable by trail that opens up into a lagoonish looking spot, but on the ground there's fire pits with bones all over this place. 2 feet, the pits are 2 feet or so wide. On the shoulder of the bearded man statue, there was a white dome. The size is comparable to a cantaloupe that has a squiggly wire that went into the eye of the statue. So here would be the cantaloupe sized object, be a squiggly wire that goes straight to the eye. He was camping near Highway 88 on a turnoff at around 3 a.m. and he hears bushes shaking and a voice. In a hissing sound, the voice spoke, and the voice said, "Should we get him?" Another voice answered and said, "No, we need a dog." And that's according to Shane, as outlandish as it is. So factually, there are thousands of missing dogs around the area. He says the doors he witnessed are linked to the strangeness of the Supes. Apache Mountains, otherwise known as the Red Mountains, from there you can see hooks, except there's more. There's allegedly a UFO looking object sitting in between these hooks, hanging inside of a crack. Another, in the Uenda area, Shane claims to have spotted a stone bear with gold eyes, the size of semi-truck tires. This statue, if you will, is apparently 50 feet tall and looks like a bear holding a block. And the mouth is wide open, and there's lots of detail in the carving, such as the bear's fur. Next, there's a bird with a head sideways, with eggs underneath, and the breast of the bird is possibly a shield of gold. He claimed he found a temple site with a sphinx. Perhaps, he claims, through a mud flood, it partially destroyed the site, and it explains why the site is in ruins. It also has pillars, and he reveals it's possibly the location of the lost Dutchman's mine.
Conclusions are inconclusive.
The superstitions continue to be mysterious, and more explorers continue to make alluring claims. Though these claims are so riveting, they likely won't be officially substantiated, if at all, for years to come. Nonetheless, they proceed to charm audiences in the treasure hunting and conspiracy spaces. The info that I sourced, such as dates, may not be precise, though are as accurate as I could find. Again, there must be an emphasis on how many variants such stories have. Also, people such as Julia Thomas have turned a profit selling phony versions of the Dutchman stories. Capitalizing on stories like this carries on today. There's plenty of hoaxes to go around. You pick your poison with this. At some time, there's been alleged cover ups regarding not just claims like this, but Native American history in general. Any kind of knowledge or technology or historical anomalies regarding Native Americans is discredited if it doesn't fit into the colonial or official version of history. Therein lies the problem. Those in the West are taught a colonial version of history. And at this point, it's obvious the Spanish were not the first to have sailed to the New World. And I still got to say that's in my opinion. Nor did they discover the Americas by accident, at least not in the way that they say. The Spanish, and again, this has to be my opinion, acquired knowledge of strange lands across the Atlantic from somewhere. If you'd ask me, perhaps it was the Moors. It's not just in Mexico, Central and South America where there were higher advanced Amerindian civilizations. For instance, the Puebloans built complex multi-storied cliff dwellings, such as Cliff Palace. And Montezuma's castle was built by the Sinagua people. Both civilizations are from what is now the southwestern United States. Also, the Anasazi built massive stone buildings, kivas, and roads located in what is now the Four Corners regions of the United States. Now, there's also the mounds slash possibly pyramids of Cahokia, and these are located in what is now the St. Louis area. So, the premise of all this is that the Dutchman's treasure is connected to Native Americans. Plus, more groundbreaking information about Native Americans has been uncovered, and it'll be interesting to see what the future has in store.